cops tased me for being black in a white neighborhood. Then they realized I was their former chief. I was jogging through my neighborhood at dawn, taking advantage of the empty streets. I bought my house here after retiring as police chief 5 years ago. As a black man, running through the whitest part of the city, I knew I'd eventually have this conversation with some officer who joined after my time. My gray beard and weight gain since retirement made me look nothing like the man whose portrait hung in the station lobby. But I'd hoped that the police force I used to love and respect was still following my guidance, to lead with their words instead of their weapons. I was about to find out I was dead wrong. A patrol car slowed beside me as I jogged, and the officer in the passenger seat rolled down his window. "You lost?" he called out. When I kept jogging, he hit the siren briefly. "Hey, I'm talking to you. This isn't your neighborhood." I stopped and explained I lived here, but he laughed. "Right, and I'm the mayor. What are you really doing here this early? Casing houses?" My stomach tightened the way it used to before dangerous raids, that familiar dread that something was about to go very wrong. I stayed calm and pointed to my house 3 doors down, telling him I'd owned it for years. I could have told them who I was, but I needed to see what my officers had become when they thought no one was watching, even if that meant risking my own safety. But I didn't think this would go that far. The officer got out of the car, while his partner radioed something I couldn't hear. "You expect me to believe you live in this neighborhood? These houses go for $500,000. He walked around me slowly, shining his flashlight in my face even though the sun was coming up. "Let me see some ID, and keep your hands where I can see them." When I reached for my wallet, he yelled, "Slowly! Don't make any sudden movements." After looking at my ID, he claimed it was probably fake. "Richard Thompson at 425 Oak Street? Nice try." He pocketed my ID instead of returning it, then called for backup saying they had a suspicious individual. When I asked for it back, his partner got out and stood behind me. "You're being awfully demanding for someone in your position," he said. "Maybe you should shut up and let us do our job." The first officer added, "We've had break-ins around here. Black male in his 50s. You match the description perfectly." The first officer told me to put my hands on the patrol car for a search. When I asked what probable cause he had, he grabbed my wrist and twisted it behind my back. "I don't need probable cause when you're being suspicious. Spread your legs." He kicked my feet apart, hard enough to make me stumble while his partner went through my pockets, throwing my phone on the ground and stepping on it. "Oops, guess you can't call your lawyer now." When I tried to stand up straight, the first officer slammed me face first into the hood. "Did I say you could move?" The metal crushed my nose and I tasted copper as blood filled my mouth. This was the department I'd built. These were the officers I'd trained, and they were treating me like I was nothing. His partner laughed and said, "Looks like he's resisting. That's a felony." They cuffed me so tight my hands went numb immediately. 2 more patrol cars arrived, and 4 additional officers surrounded me. One of them recognized the situation immediately. "Another one who doesn't belong here," he said, then kneed me in the stomach. When I doubled over, gasping, they all started taking turns shoving me between them, laughing as I stumbled. "Look at him, can barely stand, probably high on something." One officer grabbed my head and slammed it into the patrol car window. The first officer pulled out his taser. "Stop resisting!" he yelled, even though I was just standing there bleeding. Every muscle in my body screamed in anticipation of the pain I knew was coming. He shot me with it, and I collapsed to the ground, convulsing. I tried to scream, "I'm Chief Thompson," but my jaw locked. My tongue wouldn't work. Only guttural sounds came out. While I was down, his partner started kicking me in the ribs, and I heard something crack. "That's for making us waste our morning." Another officer started recording on his phone, laughing about how this would be great training footage. One officer unzipped his pants and started urinating on me while I was still twitching from the taser. "This is what we think of criminals in this neighborhood," he said, while the others cheered him on. The humiliation burned worse than the taser, worse than the broken ribs. I dedicated my life to this badge, and now they were literally pissing on everything I'd stood for. When he finished, another officer grabbed my head by the hair and forced my face into the puddle. "Clean it up," he said, grinding my face into the pavement and his own urine while the others took photos. As I lay there covered in blood and urine, a department SUV pulled up. Captain Adams stepped out, one of the few officers still around from my time. The first officer called out, "Captain, we got this guy breaking into houses." Had to use force when he resisted. Adams walked over, looked down at me, and his face went completely pale. "Oh my God, Chief Thompson? Chief Thompson?" The officer who'd been urinating quickly zipped up, staring between Adams and me in horror. "Chief? That's not how. That's Chief Thompson," Adams said, barely able to speak. "He ran this department for 15 years. He hired me. His portrait is in our lobby." My ears were still ringing, but I could hear the officers start to scramble, realizing they'd just tortured and degraded the man who'd built their entire department. The first officer who tased me dropped my ID on the ground and backed away like it was on fire. His partner started wiping at my face with his jacket, smearing the blood and urine around while his hands shook so bad he could barely hold the fabric. Adams kept saying my name over and over while pulling out his phone to call for an ambulance. The officer who'd pissed on me ran to his patrol car and grabbed a water bottle, dumping it over my head like that would somehow undo what he'd done. 2 other officers unlocked my cuffs and my hands burned as blood rushed back into them. One of them kept saying sorry under his breath while trying to help me sit up, but my ribs screamed and I couldn't move without gasping. The ambulance showed up in maybe 3 minutes, though it felt like hours lying there on the street. The paramedics looked confused, seeing 6 cops standing around one beaten man they were suddenly treating like he was made of glass. They loaded me onto a stretcher real careful while Adams climbed into the ambulance with me. He wouldn't stop apologizing the whole ride, saying he didn't know these officers were capable of this. Every bump in the road sent pain shooting through my ribs, and I just stared at the ambulance ceiling trying not to throw up. At the hospital, they wheeled me straight into a trauma room where nurses started taking pictures of everything. The taser burns on my chest looked like 2 angry red circles with lines spreading out from them. My ribs had perfect boot prints in purple and black bruises already forming. They photographed my smashed nose from 3 different angles and the cuts on my face from being ground into the pavement. A nurse asked real quiet if I wanted to file a police report, and Adams heard her from where he was pacing in the hallway. He came in and asked if we could talk privately after they finished the x-rays and cleaned my wounds. The doctor said I had 2 cracked ribs and a broken nose, plus the taser burns would scar. Adams waited until we were alone, then started begging me to let him handle this internally. He promised those officers would face real consequences and kept saying he'd personally make sure justice got done. But I could see his hands shaking and the sweat on his forehead because he knew what this meant for the whole department. I told him internal affairs better be here within the hour or I was calling the FBI. He practically ran out of the room to make that call. Catherine Gonzalez from Iowa showed up 45 minutes later with 2 evidence bags and a recorder. She sealed my bloody shirt in one bag and my urine-soaked soaked pants in another, labeling everything with case numbers. While Adams paced outside, she took my statement, asking for every detail about who did what and when. She said she'd already pulled the body cam footage from all 6 officers, plus the dash cam recordings from the 3 patrol cars. She took more photos of my injuries with her own camera and had me sign forms authorizing the release of my medical records. By the time they discharged me, it was late afternoon, and Adams drove me home in his personal car. I found an email from the HOA about suspicious activity on Oak Street this morning, warning residents to stay alert. Nicole Wells was getting her mail when Adams helped me out of the car, and she stared for a second before quickly looking away. She hurried back inside her house without saying anything, even though we'd been neighbors for 5 years. The shame hit me harder than the taser had, knowing the whole neighborhood probably saw me getting beaten and pissed on. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, jumping every time a car drove by or the house creaked. The phantom electricity kept running through my muscles, making them twitch, and I could still smell the urine even after 3 showers. I grabbed a notebook from my desk and started writing down everything I could remember before the details faded. Which officer said what, who kicked where, who laughed at which moment, every single detail I could pull from my memory. The rage kept me focused through the pain in my ribs as I filled page after page with notes. The next morning, I looked up civil rights attorneys and called 3 different firms before 9 o'clock. There's something deeply unsettling about how quickly those officers turned violent just because they saw a black man jogging. Makes me wonder what training protocols they're actually following versus what's written in the manual. Russell Marshall answered his own phone and said he'd won 12 cases against police departments in the past 5 years. He came to my house that afternoon and immediately laid out our strategy on my kitchen table. We'd file criminal charges through the district attorney's office while also pursuing a civil lawsuit against the city for damages. He warned me the department would try to bury this, and the union would protect those officers with everything they had. Wayne Ford from the police union called while Russell was still there, talking real smooth about mutual misunderstandings. He actually used the word misunderstanding to describe officers pissing on me and breaking my ribs. He suggested we could work out a settlement that would be good for everyone involved if I'd just be reasonable. I hung up on him while he was still talking, and Russell smiled, saying that was exactly the right move. Anna Ellis, from the local news, somehow got my cell number and called asking for a comment about the incident with officers. She already knew about the taser, and that multiple officers were involved, which meant someone inside was feeding her information. I didn't say anything yet, but I wrote down all her questions because they told me what she already knew. She asked specifically about body cam footage and whether I'd been hospitalized, which meant she had a good source. Russell said to stay quiet for now, but that we might need the media later when the department tried to cover this up. 3 days later, Adams called to tell me he'd placed all 6 officers on paid administrative leave. The police union had already released a statement about rushing to judgment and how officers deserve due process. Reading their careful lawyer words defending what those cops did to me made my stomach turn harder than the actual beating. The betrayal cut deeper than any of my physical wounds because this was the same union I'd fought for during my years as chief. My phone buzzed with a few text messages from former colleagues over the next hours. 2 offered support and 1 asked if I was okay, but mostly there was just silence from people I'd worked with for years. One message actually suggested I should have identified myself sooner, like getting beaten and pissed on was somehow my fault for not announcing who I was fast enough. The loneliness hit harder than I expected, sitting in my living room with ice packs on my ribs. These were people who'd smiled at my retirement party, and now they couldn't even send a simple text. Day 4 brought a knock on my door that made me jump, my body still expecting more violence. Nicole Wells stood on my porch looking nervous, holding a USB drive in her shaking hand. She had doorbell camera footage from that morning that recorded everything, she said quietly. Her camera caught the whole thing, but she was scared of retaliation if she came forward as a witness. I thanked her and promised to protect her identity if possible, though we both knew how the department treated people who spoke up. She left quickly, looking over her shoulder like the cops might be watching her house already. That afternoon, Gonzalez called to report that 3 body cams had mysteriously malfunctioned during my arrest. The dash cam from the first patrol car also had suspicious gaps in the recording, but Adams's SUV had a camera that might have caught something since it arrived late to the scene. The cover-up was already starting, just like the old days I tried so hard to change when I was chief. Evidence was disappearing and stories were getting coordinated while I sat at home with broken ribs. Eugene Reynolds from the city attorney's office called the next morning with a settlement offer. Big money for my silence, no admission of wrongdoing from the department, and I'd have to sign an NDA. The number he mentioned was bigger than my annual pension, but the principle of it made me sick to my stomach. I told him I needed time to think, while Marshall advised me to wait and not make any quick decisions. The city wanted this to go away fast before more evidence surfaced or the media got deeper into the story. That weekend I spent hours recording myself on my phone talking about everything that happened, every detail while it was still fresh, even though the pain medication made me foggy and tired. I described each officer's face, what they said, how they moved, where they stood, who did what, and when. Marshall said this could be crucial later if memories got fuzzy or stories changed. I made 3 copies of the recording and gave 1 to Marshall, kept 1 myself, and mailed 1 to my sister out of state. Monday brought my formal internal affairs interview with Gonzalez at a neutral location downtown. For 2 hours, I walked her through exactly how each officer violated the de-escalation policies I'd personally written years ago. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that they'd broken rules I created to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. She asked detailed questions about the urination incident, clearly building a case for aggravated assault charges. Her questions were sharp and specific, focusing on which officer did what, and establishing a clear timeline. When Ellis published her first article online that evening, the comments section exploded within minutes. Half the comments called me a hero for exposing corruption, while the other half said I got what I deserved for not identifying myself. Reading strangers debate whether I deserved to be tortured and humiliated made me close my laptop and walk away. People who'd never been in that situation were arguing about whether getting pissed on was justified because I didn't immediately announce I was a former chief. Some comments said I was playing the race card. Others said this proved all cops were bastards. The next day, the police union held a support rally for the suspended officers downtown. They talked about the officers' families and years of service, how they were good men being railroaded. I drove by and saw about 50 people with signs about due process and supporting our boys in blue. Not one sign mentioned what they'd actually done to me that morning. The local news covered it like both sides had equal merit, interviewing union reps who called it a misunderstanding misunderstanding. Week 3 brought my follow-up medical exam at the hospital. The doctor found nerve damage in my wrists from the too tight cuffs that might be permanent. 2 of my cracked ribs weren't healing right and might need surgery if they didn't improve soon. She documented everything in detail for my attorney, taking photos of the bruises that still covered my torso. This wasn't just going away with time like the city hoped it would. 3 days after that hospital visit, I went to the grocery store for the first time since the attack. The automatic doors made a buzzing sound when they opened, and my whole body locked up. My hands started shaking so bad I had to grab the shopping cart to stay standing. The buzzing sounded exactly like a taser charging up. Sweat poured down my face, and my chest felt like someone was squeezing it. The teenage clerk at the entrance kept asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer because my throat had closed up. My legs went weak and I slid down to the floor right there by the entrance, while other shoppers stepped around me. The manager came over and helped me to a bench outside where I sat for 20 minutes trying to breathe normal again. When I got home, I called the therapist my doctor had been pushing me to see and made an appointment for that week. Anna Ellis called me the next morning with news that made my hands shake for a different reason. She'd found a rookie cop who'd quit after 6 months and was willing to talk about what the department had become. The kid met her at a coffee shop 40 miles away and wouldn't give his name but told her everything. He said they'd thrown out all my community policing programs the day after I retired. The new training was all about being warriors and dominating the streets. They showed videos of cops getting killed and told recruits that every traffic stop could be their last. The trainer said my old approach of talking first was weak and would get them killed. Everything I'd spent 15 years building was gone in less than 5. The kid said the officers who'd attacked me were considered heroes in the department for showing strength. Anna recorded the whole conversation and sent me the audio file. Eugene Reynolds called Russell Marshall's office while I was there for a meeting about discovery documents. Russell put him on speaker so I could hear the new offer. $300,000 to make this all go away. But then Reynolds added that if I didn't take it, they'd have their investigators look into every expense report I'd ever filed as chief. They'd review every sick day, every overtime claim, every training conference I'd attended. He said they might find irregularities that could affect my pension. Russell smiled when Reynolds hung up because he knew this meant they were scared. Desperate people make threats like that when they're losing. We weren't taking their money. Captain Adams texted me at 2 in the morning saying he needed to see me right away. We met at an all-night diner where he looked around nervous before sliding into the booth across from me. The union was planning to change their story, he said. They were going to claim I'd been aggressive and had reached for something that looked like a weapon. Maybe they'd even plant something at the scene after the fact. My stomach dropped because I knew how easy it would be for them to sell that story. Adams said he'd heard them discussing it in the break room and wanted to warn me. I went home and started documenting everything. I created a spreadsheet of everywhere I went, everyone I talked to, every receipt I had. I took photos of myself every morning to show I had no weapons. I even started recording myself on my phone whenever I left the house. Talk about playing the long game. Nicole Wells waiting 4 whole days to deliver that USB drive shows more nerve than those 6 cops combined. If they wanted to frame me, I'd make it impossible. Russell called me 2 weeks later laughing so hard he could barely talk. During discovery, the city had to turn over all evidence, including personal cell phone videos from the officers. One of them had been recording the whole thing for fun and forgot to delete it. The video showed me standing completely still with my empty hands visible at my sides when they attacked. You could hear me trying to tell them who I was while they laughed. You could see the first taser hit when I wasn't doing anything but standing there bleeding. Russell said this video alone would win us the case. The city council meeting was packed when I walked in 3 weeks later. Russell had told me not to testify because anything I said could be used against me in court, but I needed them to hear from me what their police force had become. Adams sat in the back row trying to look invisible. The union guys filled the front row and stared at me like they wanted to kill me right there. I stood at the podium and talked for 20 minutes about how I'd built that department from nothing, how we'd gone from one of the most violent cities to one of the safest, how I'd trained every officer to protect and serve, not hunt and dominate. Then I described what they'd done to me in detail. The room was dead silent except for a few gasps when I talked about the officer urinating on me. I ended by saying the badge I'd loved was now something that made me sick to look at. The mayor announced the next day that they were bringing in an external review team to investigate the whole department. The union president went on the news calling it a witch hunt and saying I was just trying to get rich off the city. The mayor gave a speech about transparency and accountability, but I knew nothing would really change. They'd shuffle some people around, maybe update some policies, then go back to business as usual. These reviews never fixed anything. They just made politicians look like they cared. 3 months passed before the district attorney finally announced charges. Only the officer who'd urinated on me got charged with misdemeanor assault. The others faced nothing. No charges for the taser, the beating, the broken ribs, nothing. The rage burned so hot I thought I might have another panic attack. Russell reminded me we still had the civil case and that criminal charges were always hard to get against cops, but it still felt like a knife in my gut that 5 of them would walk away clean. We filed our civil lawsuit the next week, naming all 6 officers personally, plus the city, the police union, and Adams in his official capacity as captain. The number Russell put on it made headlines, $10 million. The union called a press conference to say I was just money hungry and trying to profit off a routine arrest. They ignored the medical reports about my broken ribs and nerve damage. They ignored the video showing me doing nothing wrong. They just kept saying I was greedy. Then the city started playing dirty with code enforcement harassment. Suddenly I was getting citations for my grass being an inch too tall. My trash cans were supposedly 2 feet too far from the curb. They said my mailbox wasn't the right height even though it hadn't moved in 5 years. Every week brought a new citation for something stupid. I documented all of it and gave it to Russell for our retaliation claim. The more they pushed, the more determined I got to see this through. The therapist's office was small and smelled like vanilla candles when I walked in 3 weeks later. Russell said I needed this for the case, said juries respond better when victims show they're getting help. I sat in the leather chair and stared at the diplomas on the wall while she asked me to start from the beginning. My hands shook when I described the taser hitting me, how my body locked up and I couldn't even scream my own name. She wrote notes on a yellow pad and didn't say much, just nodded when I talked about the officer pissing on me while I was down. I told her how I kept seeing their faces every time I closed my eyes, how I couldn't jog anymore without my chest getting tight. The session lasted 50 minutes but felt like 5 hours. 2 days later, Russell called me to his office to prep for my deposition.